Greetings, fellow humans. I am Hugh.
And I am Man.
And together we are definitely not
Two
kobolds in a trench coat. We enjoy human activities, such as paying taxes,
Having existential crises,
and RPG horror stories. Let's see what we've got today.
First up, we have a player who wasn't allowed to speak common, a DM who made up a body count stat for the only woman at the table, and a guy who got rejected by his IRL girlfriend in-game.
The DM didn't let me take common, by Reddit user Katie Ferry. This happened in Kansas, back in the mid-90s. All players involved were in high school, aka we were young and stupid. So while this was absolutely a horror story at the time, looking back on it, I find a lot of things to laugh about and learn from. I've always been kinda obsessed with playing characters that are a little more out there with regard to ancestry/race. I don't remember how or why anymore, but I wanted to play an elven werewolf. And the DM came back to me with a race from one of a bazillion sidebooks that AD&D was so fond of. I don't remember the race's name anymore, but basically, they were a large wolf that could turn into an elf and had a lot of lycanthropic traits, like an immunity to damage that wasn't magic or silver. To balance this, I would not be allowed to start with common as one of my starting languages. I said that was fine, and I rolled up a druid. I did not realise that I would not start with any language in common with the other characters, of which, at this point, I only vaguely remember the group's paladin, and that only vaguely.
There's a reason why it's called common. It's because everybody speaks it, like having a common language in any country. You sort of have to do it in order for your party to be able to communicate properly. It just makes the game easier.
I've known people who've deliberately inserted language barriers for themselves or as part of a mechanic. Sometimes this can be fun if the player wants it. This feels a little bit forced, and I don't really quite understand how it balances out their character. It just creates an impediment to playing rather than an actual disadvantage. One of the first encounters of the game involved a slaver caravan rolling into town. The paladin had caught word that they'd be coming, so rallied the town into defensive positions, setting up barricades and getting anyone good with a bow to man them. My character had a bow, so she communicated to me, complete with hand gestures, where to be. I made an intelligence check to understand, succeeded, figured out that something big was happening, and went to where I was told to be without the paladin or her player cottoning on to the fact that my character didn't understand common. Slaver caravan rolls up and comes to a stop outside of town. Paladin calls out to archers, "Hold your fire." Well, I made an intelligence check to understand, and I rolled a nat 1. Looked at the DM, who gave an exacerbated sigh and nodded. I declared I was shooting the caravan leader, and rolled a nat 20. Would have died right there from return fire, but none of the arrows were silver, so I didn't.
Again, I think that this would be a situation where you would want the other players to actually know beforehand the player doesn't speak common, because this whole they don't know I don't speak common I'm pretty sure it's just about to bite them in the butt, especially given what happened. But it's one of those situations where it could have been a really fun roleplay moment. Absolutely. You roll a nat 1 on intelligence. Oops, I don't understand. Guess I'm going to attack. That's kind of hilarious. But the fact that nobody else had any idea that that's what was going on, I think probably is going to end up being more the problem than anything else.
I do really enjoy those complete opposite roles in those situations, which did at least make for excellent role-playing in the situation, Nat 1 to understand and Nat 20 to hit. Classic. Paladin approaches my character while he's pulling arrows out of himself and starts yelling at him. I didn't need to make an intelligence check for my character to realise he messed up. But then Paladin gets in his face and demands, "What do you have to say for yourself?" I then had to explain out of character that my character didn't speak common. Paladin's player now gets in my face and demands to know why I didn't take common, and I had to explain that the DM had forbidden me from taking it. DM was forced to admit that that was his fault. We had to half-bake an excuse for the paladin not to PK me, and the DM took care for this first encounter not to wind up too hostile after that. I don't remember a lot else from the campaign, aside from going to the Plain of Infinite Forest and an ugly encounter with a werewolf. Bad times, but fun memories.
This just exemplifies what I was saying earlier about you need to tell your party if this is going to be something that is going to be a thing, if you're going to have a player that doesn't speak common, because obviously the paladin player was annoyed. I mean, I would be annoyed if it was me. I would say, hold your fire, and then they're like, I'm going to attack anyway. I'd be not happy. And the paladin wasn't, and that's fair. The fact that then they had to have a whole discussion and the DM's like, yeah, I said they couldn't have common. Again, that's a conversation that you have before the session starts, and then people can play into it. It can be a fun moment for everybody instead of all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a player goes rogue and you're having to deal with the aftermath.
Yeah, this definitely could have just been solved by a conversation pre-game and the DM making everyone aware of this fact out of character, and then their characters could learn OP doesn't speak common. But at least make the players aware so then they can roleplay that effectively and not be actually mad at the player thinking they chose not to take common.
Or if you want to have a language barrier situation, then maybe have a player that does speak common, but it's not their first language and they're not horribly fluent in it. Especially if you're somebody who maybe English isn't your first language or something like that. That could actually be super fun. Be able to incorporate your own experience into a language barrier into your roleplay. But again, that's a conversation that you have to have with your party rather than this is a decision I'm making for you, the player, and y'all are just going to have to deal with it. DM demands to know a woman's body count in session 0 by Reddit user Whole Resolution 5678. About 3 months ago, I decided to suck it up and drive down to the game shop after years of making excuses due to the distance and my hectic work schedule, which is thankfully now more orderly. It didn't take long before I found somebody who was willing to DM. He was a regular on Saturdays and was also desperate for some D&D, so we both agreed to get a game going. He got this game announced at the game shop website, and in 2 weeks we had 8 players, 7 men, including myself, and 1 woman. She ended up playing the only female character in the campaign, a tiefling warlock, to which the DM said, "Oh, the horny race." She gave him a cringe look and said, "I'm just here to kill ASMR, lol." DM then laughed really obnoxiously.
The horny race. Tieflings aren't the horny race. I mean, it depends which corner of the internet you go to, but most commonly, they're supposed to be rainbows of unlimited gayness. In fact, one of the biggest gripes I had with the D&D movie was that they gave the tiefling a normal skin tone rather than a fantastical colour. Just a minor gripe there, but we've already seen this major red flag.
I mean, technically the DM is right because tieflings have horns. Maybe that was the joke he was going for.
Somehow I doubt that, but, we can see.
What's funny is that most of the people that I've played D&D with that have tieflings have very ace vibes for the most part. So actually, I would say that tieflings kind of attract ace players in my experience. So it's sort of the opposite. And then there's me, a halfling wizard. Session 0 was basically an intro session to our characters, and the DM let us explore the sort of hub town of the campaign and talk to some extraplanar spirits, which were basically there to tell some campaign rules and in a unique way, i.e. no metagaming, funky dice, etc. That's actually a really interesting way to do that. It's almost like being at the beginning stages of a video game. Props for creativity, I guess. As we began talking to one of the extraplanar spirits that is going over the character sheets with us to iron out any potential mistakes and letting some of the really unfortunate players re-roll, but then the spirit asks the tiefling, "So, I'm reading your backstory, but I haven't seen anything about your body count. Mind clearing that up for me?" She then said, "It's not important." He then said, "Oh, it very much is," with a wicked smile. She awkwardly chuckled and said, "Stop being weird, you're not getting my body count." DM said, "Oh, come on, it's relevant to the campaign. Your sexual market modifier will be influenced by it." I wish he was joking, but he actually showed us the modified character sheet with, yes, a sexual market score modifier.
That is abhorrent, disgusting, distasteful, to use some understatements.
Yeah, that's a whole new level of creepy. I mean, I don't even know. Like, that's the thing. That's how creepy it is. It's like, first of all, who cares? Why are we adding a stat? in D&D, also a stat that has nothing to do with the game. I'd understand if there was something with your game mechanics that you were trying to add, but what does that have to do with fun homebrew game mechanics?
Adding a stat can be fun. It's nothing particularly wrong with that aspect. It's just to do with this. Why would that be relevant to anything at all? Why do you need that?
It's never relevant, it's never needed, and nobody cares. Except for apparently the DM. She started obviously getting upset and pointed out accurately that he didn't ask any of us, the guys, about their male characters or the genderless plasmoid history, and said, "A key that can open many doors is a master key, and a lock that opens for many keys is a terrible lock." He then joked about how Confucius and Aristotle both lived by this quote. And then this idiot started laughing like he was being funny in an irreverent humor kind of way. Nobody else was laughing. He then shook his head and just said, "Fine." He then looked directly at her with a big old grin and said, "Let's look at how ran through you really are." He looks down at his dice bag and grabs it. A nat 20 means you're a virgin, and a nat 1 means you're for the streets. And then kept laughing at his own jokes as she just shook her head and left. And then me and a couple of guys followed shortly after while the DM rolled and then started trying to get us back, trying to pivot, and claimed that it was a joke and that he just has a messed up sense of humor. He gave up after a while and just played with the remainers until he could find adequate replacements. We ended up doing another game a few weeks later with a better DM, and we ended up actually becoming friends. TLDR. DM tries to find out a character's body count in session 0 through a ghost NPC, thinking he can find out how ran through the player was. We left and played our own game and became friends.
Yeah, that completely nosedived off the cliff. We were all expecting it to, although I was particularly aggrieved to hear that awful key and lock expression. People are people. Let them do as they want. You don't get to judge others for this. You don't get to judge others for their activities in private. It's none of your business.
Also, just because certain people's body parts resemble certain other inanimate objects doesn't mean that we can compare them to said inanimate objects.
The resemblance is purely in shape. That's it. The metaphor does not apply.
Not even really in shape. It's like vaguely in shape, sort of, kind of. That said, good on the female player who got up and said, "Screw this one guy in particular," and left. And good for the others who followed suit, because you do not want to be in a campaign with a guy who decides to roll a dice to decide whether or not somebody is a virgin, and that a nat 20 equals virginity.
I particularly enjoy that he tried to get philosophical about his intense misogyny. Okay, sure, some ancient philosophers definitely had some misogynistic views, but personally, I'd like to get all Diogenes on this guy.
Somehow I doubt that those two utilized that saying. I think that's a much more modern euphemism / metaphor, whatever you want to call it. I don't think that Aristotle and Confucius lived by it. I love how these manosphere weirdos will say something like that about the locks and the keys, like it's something super philosophical, and guys like DM will be like, "Oh yeah, that's so deep," and not even think about the fact that it's just weird.
If you want to know about the kind of men that most women, at least the women I know, like, you need to look towards men like Pedro Pascal and Keanu Reeves.
And Henry Cavill, because he's a massive nerd. It has absolutely nothing to do with how good he looks in a white wig and swinging a sword, or without a shirt.
Or how attractive they find it when you see Pedro Pascal in his cliche role of being surrogate father to wayward child. Player asked out his IRL girlfriend in game and got rejected by Devil's Taint 0. We just played a game of D&D where there were 5 players. The 2 that mean anything here are the ASMR Paladin and the Human Wizard. One thing to keep in mind is that the boyfriend made the girlfriend's character for her because she was fairly new to D&D. We suspect that he made her character to match what his perfect girlfriend would look like. So basically, a Greek goddess warrior who's 7 feet tall, rippling with muscles. Over the course of the campaign, the wizard has wanted to seduce his IRL girlfriend in-game for a while. He has stated his character fell in love with her when she saved his life after he yelled at a BBEG thinking he had the power to stop them, when in reality he was seconds away from dying. While getting ready to fight a large beast, the wizard approached the paladin and said that he never had anyone who really loved him, and he thought that with everything going on, he didn't want to waste time. He had written a speech which he read to her for 5 actual real-life minutes. She sat in silence and listened to him explain why she should date him, and why she is the one for him. At the end of it, she told him she didn't see him like that and walked away. It was incredibly awkward for everyone involved. We all sat around the table exchanging looks and trying not to laugh. Even the DM tried to intervene by having several characters come in by them in an attempt to cut short this awful seduction attempt. The wizard eventually caught on, brushed it off, and we moved forward.
I love that so much. Literally, this dude creates a character that's like his fantasy woman, and then she's like, nah, you're not my type.
The only thing that would complete the cliche here is if that she was a half-orc.
At least he took it well. Not gonna lie, I was kind of expecting them to like break up IRL over that one.
It's good at least it was brushed off in seemingly good humour. However, dude could have showed a bit of chill in creating his girlfriend's character. I get it, she's new, and if she had wanted him to help with that and do that for her, fine. But tone it down a bit, dude.
Also, can we just talk about the fact that he had a 5-minute speech, and then she's like, nah. Like, you almost feel sorry for the wizard, but like, not really, because he totally did it to himself. Hey, Hugh.
Yes, man?
What does the Warforged wizard use to lubricate his joints?
I don't know. What does he?
Castor oil.
And with that, we have definitely not been two kobolds in a trench coat. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make the necessary sacrifices to Tiamat. We'll see you next time.